Subplots were once so much of a joke or a cliche in titles like X-Men that there were open jokes that would go on about how Chris Claremont had like 8,000 balls in the air all at once, and that the subplot. I mean, I remember parody comics making fun of it, and like Forbush Man would make fun of Claremont subplots. But today, those are largely gone. And why? Weren't subplots useful in terms of getting long-term readers onto a comic and generating interest? I think they were. So what happened? Hey everybody, this is Perch. Subplots are a weird thing because to me, I don't think they should be controversial. But I was chatting with somebody the other day, and we were talking about what happened to kind of the subplot. What happened to this idea that you would tee things up for the next story, kind of in the background of the current story, so you had few things kept going. You had this kind of involved storytelling, and I mentioned that there's a couple people that have kind of thrown shade at subplots in the past. And then I thought to myself, is that really true, or am I just kind of remembering it wrong? And so I went back and I looked at some old, not that old, like interviews and comments that were made on panels back, in the last 10 years or so. And both from like Joe Quesada, some from Tom Brevoort, some from some of the editors that go on at Marvel and DC, although I'm having trouble getting a DC name. So here is where my memory tells me it's been said there, but maybe I'm wrong. But there was this kind of almost distaste, and nobody comes out and says, like Claremont sucks or those stories were bad, but the comments are really along the lines of, our readers don't want this kind of really complex, intricate storytelling with a lot of different angles and lots of subplots and lots of payoffs that they have to wait a year or more to enjoy. And the challenge of that is all the evidence I have suggests the opposite. And we can go down any number of fronts. If you look at some of the indie comics, like Walking Dead, for example, that went on a long time, had a consistent art team. So there's a lot of reasons why it was successful. But one of the things it was consistently praised by, both with fans and with critics and even with some of the awards, was that it would tee up plots in the future. It would have subplots. It would have kind of things that would go on inside the comic that would pay off like a year later or more. And you see interviews by Robert Kirkman talking about how there's a lot of fan engagement and a lot of when they do stuff like that they get a really positive response. You look at what readers are asking for. You look at what people respond to in comics. When you have a long running plot, it tends to gather interest. And in many ways, Marvel does use this approach for their events. They do tend to do subplots or teases for their events. They often also accompany that with a ton of marketing and promo art and other things. But there is this push to kind of tee up the events. Yet within the regular solo comics, within the ongoing monthly books, there seems to be a pullback. And one of the things that C.B. Cebulski said, and then some people commented that they'd been told by C.B. Cebulski, so maybe that was true, maybe not. Even things like Sina Grace's interviews after he left Marvel, some kind of the bitterness there. There are a lot of comments around how Marvel really prefers you do a pitch for your story. Do one story, do your 6 issues, 12 issues, and don't think beyond that. Don't get too many things involved. Tom Brevoort made the comment as well, like don't get too many complex things going on because too many writers never get to those ideas, and so. Don't put a lot of stuff up in the air that you're never going to get to. We encourage our people to kind of keep things more straightforward. And some interpret that as writing for the trade, but it's really a different message going on. The message is we don't know if we're going to keep hiring you beyond 6 issues to 12 issues. And maybe, in a more kind of cynical way, we don't want any creator to have leverage over us by having so many things kind of in the hopper that it makes it harder to, extract them from the comic. Now here's a weird thing. It happens, but very, very rarely. But maybe this is where I'm not hearing it. But generally speaking, there's been very few instances that I'm aware of where a creator has gone into an editor or a company and kind of, quote unquote, held them hostage, demanded money. Like picture Kelly Thompson is on Captain Marvel right now, and she's had for Marvel a longer run. I mean, it's gone past 8 issues, so this is a long. She's old in the run at this point after getting into double digits. But imagine if she went to Marvel and said, "Hey, in issue ever since issue number 1, I had a bunch of things in the background of that comic, and they're all going to tie in together, and they're going to be a big reveal, and I'm pulling all these things together, but you're going to have to pay me more. I'm going to need a 20% increase in what I'm doing." I don't think that happens. It's not happening. Definitely, creators will ask for things. You've heard with some of the interviews I've done, creators will come in and say, "Hey, I would like, maybe the company comes to them and says, we'd like you to do this pitch, or we'd like you to do this comic." The creator comes back and kind of, throws everything on the table. Like, "I'd like this." They shoot for the moon. But that's very different than somebody coming in and saying, "Hey, I'm right in the middle of this run, and if you want to keep me, you're going to have to pay me more." That's a very different approach, and it doesn't happen very often. Yet it seems like there's a structure in comics put into place to prevent that from happening, to block that from happening, but I don't think it's happening in the first place. So all this is really doing, it feels like, is eroding kind of longevity and forward planning and depth in comics. I think that a lot of these writers, in particular, I think you look at what Matt Rosenberg and Kelly Thompson have done in other companies or for other titles, and they have the capability to write subplots and to tee things up for a longer run. Those abilities don't seem to come out at Marvel in their Marvel work. Now let me be clear, because people will pick at some of the details here. I'm not saying you either like their work or you don't. I'm not. That's up to you. That's your choice. And I'm not saying they're doing just kind of shallow level stories. It's just, if you look at, say, Rosenberg's work outside of Marvel in the indies, and you notice he's got a lot of kind of longer plot elements that he's teeing up. And then you look at his work with Marvel, even like you take The Punisher, for example, that he recently did, and the story was written in such a way that it never got beyond like a 4-issue bubble. He would do things, but it was always very kind of pulled back. And in some cases, by the way, and this is where I think a lot of people blame the writers for writing kind of more shallow things, but I think it's a company. I don't think it's the writers. Let's take a look at Matt Rosenberg's Hawkeye Freefall. And that comic ended on a kind of a new, not a full new status quo, but some changes to Hawkeye. It had a finish that ended in a different place from where it began. And there were some elements to that story, even though it was a limited series, very short. There were some elements to that story that, were trying to get other things spinning, trying to get some other, factors going. But Marvel canceled it, or they took it to digital, and they said they printed, anyway. And then it didn't receive really kind of any marketing. I mean, all the marketing for that title was really done by Rosenberg himself. And it felt like, I mean, I would be completely unsurprised if Hawkeye shows up in an Avengers title in like 3 months, just like normal. Like, here's Hawkeye, he's hanging out. But the Hawkeye, Free Fall series ended in such a way that shouldn't be the case. There's some problems. Hawkeye is in trouble in Marvel. Or I mean, it just I don't know what I'm saying here. It just shouldn't end. It shouldn't just pick up where it left. But Marvel seems to be doing that with their titles now. Everything is short-term thinking. Everything is kind of 6 issues, 12 issues max, and writers are discouraged from subplots. And if you go back 20 years to stuff that Kurt Busiek was doing, or Chris Claremont, or all, many of the writers they had then, there were lots of attempts. And like I said, it was a joke. Claremont had so many things going, it was like a cliche, where he had, subplot 1, 2. I mean, sometimes you felt like the issue was going to be nothing but subplots, and they weren't going to actually have a main story. And to kind of think about that now, it would just never happen. Like that world is over. And it doesn't seem like it's coming back. And I think I don't think it's writers are less talented today. I think it's the company making a conscious choice to keep this from happening. But why? What value? What point? Is it to make comics more accessible, quote unquote, accessible to new readers? Well, I don't know. That doesn't wash because the comics with the subplots were getting new readers a lot faster and better than they are today. So comics are supposedly more accessible today, but they seem to have a much harder time pulling in new readers than they did 25 years ago when you had, subplots everywhere and high density stories. So I don't know. That's my opinion anyway. What about you? First of all, do you know what I'm talking about? Number two, do you remember subplots and kind of these storytelling methods? What's your theory for why they don't exist today? And do you miss them? Do you think that they actually do damage to comics, that it hurts kind of the longevity? Or do you prefer what we have now, which is, more of you can come in, you can go, and, it's easy in, easy out? Do you prefer that kind of storytelling or some mix in between? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Please do. Appreciate every subscriber I have and the comments I get, even when you're taking the piss out of me in the comments. I appreciate those too. Follow me on social media, and you can send me email at comicsperch@gmail.com. But most importantly, and as always, thanks for listening.